All right, so on this video, we're going to kind of finish our discussion of the idea of special prices by focusing on the shutdown price. So first I want to remind you of this. What we did in the previous video was looking at the break-even price. So if you recall, the break-even price is determined by the price that's just at the point where average total cost intersects that marginal cost. And that was the price where profits were exactly equal to zero. We also determined that any price below that break-even price results in a loss, a negative profit. So the first question is are negative profits okay? So generally in the real world, firms will absorb losses in production because they expect things to get better. Also, you have to keep in mind that we still have this idea of the total fixed cost floating around. This idea of even when you produce nothing, you're still having to cover, or you're having to spend a money equivalent equal to the total fixed cost. Those ideas of salaried personnel, mortgage payments, rental payments, all those things which, regardless of whether you produce a lot, a little, or nothing, you still have to pay these things. So when you start talking about a loss, the decision becomes, do I produce and lose money, or do I not produce and lose money? So one of the ideas underlying the shutdown price is that at some point, the price is below the break-even price, you lose less money by producing than not producing. And remember, the money you lose by not producing is equal to the total fixed cost. But then you get to a point, a price that's low enough that you actually lose less money. You're better off by not producing. So that's the idea of the shutdown price. So I guess we'll just start out by saying, what is the shutdown price? Similar to the idea of the break-even price, the shutdown price occurs at the point where the average variable cost intersects that marginal cost. So we'll just draw that line. Again, so we're talking about a special price. Marginal revenue line is the same thing as the market price. And again, same deal. We have, the firm is listening to the price. If it gets this price, it's a special price. It's what we're just going to call our break-even price, and we'll see why in a second. So we go through our steps. The firm, here's the price. First step, write down that marginal revenue line, that horizontal line that's equal to the price. Step 2, we look at where does the marginal revenue line cross the marginal cost curve. Marginal revenue is marginal cost. It's right there. We drop the line. That gives us the Y star, the profit maximizing level of output. Again, that's the idea of this is the level of output that will generate the most profit. It may be a negative profit, but the idea is you're going to be worse off by producing more or producing less. Okay, step 1, draw that marginal revenue line. Step 2, drop down to the horizontal axis to give you that level, that profit maximizing level of output. Step 3 and 4 is figuring out the profit. Okay, so step 3 is what's the total revenue? Well, we have the price, the height. We have the output, the width. So again, height times width, area of the box, that represents our total revenue. Okay, step 4. We have to figure out, in order to figure out the profit, we already have the total revenue, now we have to figure out the total cost. So again, we're using our rule of, at this level of output, we're looking for the average total cost for this level of output. So we go up this line until we hit the average total cost curve, go across. So this is our average total cost for that level of output. So we have our height, average total cost, our width, the level of output. So that height times width, area of this box, is our total cost. Again, just following the same thing we've been doing for a while. And so what are we left with? Well, first of all, you should notice that the total cost box, this big thing, is larger than the total revenue box. So we're going to be talking about a negative profit. So this box right here is our profit, but it's a negative profit because the total cost box is greater than the total revenue box. So this is a loss. Okay. So all we've done so far is show the loss generated at this price and given these cost curves. Now remember, because this is our profit maximization exercise, we're basically saying the best you can do is lose this much money. If we produce more or we produce less, the problem is going to be the loss is going to get greater, so we're worse off. Okay, so we've shown the loss. Now the question is, how is this relevant to the idea of a shutdown? How do we ascertain whether are we better off producing and losing money, and that's what this represents, or do we lose, how much money do we lose by not producing? So again, we have this idea of, or we have the task of trying to figure out, so what's the total fixed cost? Remember, total fixed cost ends up being our loss if we produce nothing, okay? We produce nothing, there's no revenue. What's our total cost of production? Well, if we're producing nothing, we have zero total variable costs, which means our total fixed cost represents the entire total cost, and we have no revenue, so our loss is total revenue, 0 minus total fixed cost, so our loss is total fixed cost. So, again, that's our reference point. The loss from not producing is our total fixed cost. So the question is this, how does this area, this loss, correspond to the total fixed cost? Well, to do that, we're going to have to kind of look at, first of all, we want to look at where does the average fixed cost come from? Because remember, we have average total cost, average variable cost. We started out with our total cost relationship. Total cost is equal to the sum of total fixed cost plus total variable cost. We showed before, by dividing through both sides by the output, that our average total cost is equal to the average fixed cost plus the average variable cost. And remember, on these graphs, we have an average total cost. We have an average variable cost. So if we just do a little manipulation, we can see that the average fixed cost is really just the difference between the average total cost and the average variable cost. So technically speaking, if we look at any slice here, so this is our average variable cost, this is our average total cost, so the difference between those curves is simply the average fixed cost. Average total cost minus average variable cost equals the average fixed cost, which is right there. So far so good. Now, all we have is an average fixed cost, this gap. How do we turn the average fixed cost into a total fixed cost? Well, kind of using the same manipulations we did before with the average variable cost and then the average fixed cost. Average fixed cost is equal, by definition, total fixed cost divided by the output. If we just cross multiply, our total fixed cost is equal to the average fixed cost times the level of output. So that's our little trick, that's our clue. So, we're at this level of output. We have our total cost box, and it just so happens that if we look at the average variable cost for this level of output, this box, while it was also it was the total revenue, it's also the total variable cost. Average variable cost, right, times with the output gives us the total variable cost. Remember, the big box was the average total cost. If we subtract out the total variable cost, this box, what was our loss before, is equal to our total fixed cost. Remember, this gap, the difference between the average total cost and the average variable cost, is our average fixed cost. So the height of this thing right here times the quantity gives us the total fixed cost. So at this shutdown price, which I was telling you is at the point where average variable cost intersects the marginal cost curve, we see that if we produce this loss, so this is the loss, the negative profit from production, happens to be equal to the total fixed cost. So this is kind of our separating point. So any price above the shutdown price means if we produce, our profit will get smaller. Because remember, the higher the price goes, the larger the profit gets, or the less negative it gets. So this loss gets smaller. Total fixed cost does not change. So in this case, the loss is less than the total fixed cost. If the price gets lower, our loss gets larger. So the area of the loss due to production gets larger, which means it's getting larger than the total fixed cost. Which means if we're below this price, we lose less money. The amount we lose from not producing is total fixed cost. And the loss from not producing is less than the loss from producing, which would be the area of this kind of negative profit. So this is a little complicated. Probably with this video, you're going to have to work through, go through it a little bit more, work it through it at home, and we'll talk about it in class. But we've pretty much laid out now all the key prices. The break-even price, that separation between positive profit and negative profit, and the shutdown price, the separation between losing less money from producing versus losing less money from not producing.